Welcome to Kinwise Conversations in AI. Today, we're joined by Dr. Dana Rieger, Clinical Associate Professor of Human Development and Family Science at the UNC School of Education and UNC's first Faculty Fellow for Generative AI at the Center for Faculty Excellence. Drawing on her deep research into relationship formation, online dating, and teletherapy, Dr. Rieger shares her journey from early AI adopter to a campus leader, guiding faculty on how to thoughtfully and ethically navigate the integration of AI into course design and assessment. Get ready for a deep dive into the paradigm shift AI presents in education, the vital importance of student autonomy, and how to redesign learning to be more experiential and meaningful. Dana, I'm so grateful that you're on the show with me today. And I want to begin by giving you an opportunity to share a little bit about your story so folks listening will understand who you are, the experiences that you bring to the table, and why you're interested in AI. So I'm going to turn it over to you and just let you orient our listeners to who you are.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. So I will say my path has meandered in some interesting ways, and that has led me here. I have a background in couple and family therapy, and I've always been kind of fascinated in how technology shapes our relationships and our lives. I've done some research on the impact of technology on relationship formation, and I actually wrote my dissertation on online dating and looking at how technology shapes the way that couples kind of share the story of how they met. Also done some other research looking at how technology can be used as interventions in therapy and how teletherapy can be useful. Over the last couple of years since I've been at UNC and my role has primarily been focused on teaching and not clinical work, my interest in technology has naturally shifted towards education, specifically how technology shapes classroom engagement, teacher-student relationships. In the fall of 2022, I became an early adopter of AI. I saw TikTok about ChatGPT and kind of panicked a little bit because I thought my students had been using it in the fall semester. I spent the entire winter break of 2022 redesigning most of my assessments to be more AI avoidant. And then when I got into the classroom in 2023, I realized I was actually pretty ahead of the curve. So I had reached out to our Center for Faculty Excellence and to our leadership in the school here and found that there really wasn't much guidance and everybody was kind of just trying to figure it out. And so I took it upon myself to do my own research and kind of test out a bunch of tools and see what worked and talk to students about their AI use. I then started receiving invitations to share my experiences. Over the next year, the CFE then formally, our Center for Faculty Excellence, formally asked me to take on this role as the faculty fellow. In that role, I help faculty think through the integration of AI into their course design and their assessment. Yeah, that's pretty much how I got here.
You were so aware of what was going on. I feel like the end of 2022, I remember it was Thanksgiving. My brother was like, "You have to see this." And we just kept messing with it, and my mind was blown. And
Oh,
then I went back to work, and nobody was talking about this new technology. And it was such a weird thing to be like, this is crazy.
right. It was actually the second moment in my life where I had this, what felt like a paradigm shift related to technology. I'm an elder millennial, so I remember being in middle school and getting the internet for the first time and my mind just being blown. And to me, that moment of first kind of uploading an assignment into ChatGPT to see how it could respond to the questions, my mind was just blown. And I was excited and very fearful, but it was a real paradigm shift.
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting. Like I know that those early models especially had a lot of flaws and people use them and then we're like, "Oh, there's a lot of hallucinations or a lot of problems." But even then, the amount of work it was able to do so quickly, I think was very telling about the direction that we were going and the kind of questions we needed to start asking.
Totally.
And you made the decision to redesign that pretty fast. Like you were able to redesign your class. And now it's been a couple of years. And so I'm curious, what did your first attempts at trying to redesign how you taught, how did that look? And how has that transformed and changed over the past 3 years
Yeah.
now?
That's a great question. And honestly, I will say it was a very fear-driven kind of redesign. I mostly just wanted to ensure that my students were actually engaging with the material. So I would say early on, a lot of my efforts focused on kind of avoiding AI. For example, if I gave my students an assessment that was experiential in nature, like to conduct an interview with someone, I now kind of added elements so that they had to document the experience to ensure that they weren't using AI to hallucinate an interview or to fabricate a paper. So it really started with ensuring that they were documenting what they were doing in more specific ways, gave them an attestation form to fill out at the end of each assessment so that I could learn more about how they were using AI tools. I gave them the option to use AI on a few assignments. And I would say over the last 2 years, I've been more intentional about asking them to use AI in specific ways and documenting their AI use to support their learning. So I would say that's pretty much how it shifted. I've been more intentional, I would say, in both directions. I've been more intentional about creating assessments that are experiential and creative in nature, and more intentional about giving them assessments that are written that intentionally integrate AI in specific ways to build skills.
What do conversations look like around how you expect students to use AI in your class? And then how do you make decisions or explain your thinking when they're allowed to use AI versus when you're more discouraging of using it?
Yeah. So in my classroom, students can use AI any way they want. I don't want to play the role of police, right? I don't want to police their AI use. And frankly, there's a lot of research that shows that policing AI use can amplify disciplinary biases and kind of assessing what you think is AI use and
Hmm.
what's not, and there really aren't reliable plagiarism detectors. So I've designed my assessment such that they can use it any way they want. In fact, I'm asking them to use it, or it would be near impossible for them to use it and still kind of outsource their learning, right? Because I've designed it such that they're engaging in experiences or creating something that AI can't create, multimedia, et cetera, stuff like that. So I would say my approach is pretty collaborative. I start every class period after the first day of getting to know you stuff. Day two of all of my classes is an assessment day. And on that day, we talk about AI tools, we talk about bias, we talk about data privacy, we talk about ethics, and we talk about what responsible use looks like. As the semester kind of moves on, we're constantly having conversations about AI and how it might support them and how it might hinder them in the execution of each of their individual assessments. Sometimes I might ask them to use it in class. I do always clarify with students that if they have any kind of ethical objection to using AI, I will always work with them to develop an alternative assessment that meets the
Hmm.
same learning goals that I have. Because I want to respect student autonomy. I think that's really important. I think there are lots of valid ethical reasons why someone might object to using AI. And so I try to create space for that.
Yeah, I think that's really insightful too, because I have seen that there are people who are very concerned about this technology. They don't want anything to do with it. And so being able to respond to those students, I'm sure makes them feel seen. And you can be pro AI and feel like it's great, or you can be really against it. And I think a lot of people, as they learn more, are somewhere in the middle or kind of swing between those two places because there are real concerns and real opportunities with the technology.
Totally. And I would say a lot of people assume because of my role that I have this like pro AI agenda, and I really don't. I think AI can be a useful tool to enhance learning in very specific instances where you have a strong pedagogical rationale, but I think for the most part it outsources learning. Most of my kind of assessment redesigns have been a little more AI avoidant, thinking about how students can avoid AI use. So I think it's quite rare where I think AI can truly enhance learning at the level of assessment that I'm kind of asking students to execute in some of my classes.
I know in your role as the your generative AI faculty fellow role, you've been working with a lot of faculty, you've led workshops about how to use AI. As you've worked with faculty, what are some things that you've seen about how people tend to respond, resistance, acceptance, and what do conversations look like as you're leading faculty and how to navigate this new technology?
Yeah. I would say it depends on the format. Sometimes I lead a workshop during a regularly scheduled faculty meeting where every faculty member is there. And in those kind of more mandated meetings, I get a much broader range of responses. Typically, faculty who are very resistant, hesitant, or skeptical aren't actively and voluntarily attending these workshops that I'm giving. So I would say it's a really broad range of responses. Even if faculty are enthusiastic about AI, everybody is skeptical, rightfully so, fearful of some of the risks, outsourcing student learning, privacy risks, environmental concerns, existential concerns, about the exploitation of human data and a threat to like human autonomy. So those are real concerns, and it's a really broad range.
Yeah. Do you have an example, or as you've worked with faculty or taught faculty how to approach AI, do you have a favorite example where someone had a breakthrough moment about how this could be useful?
Yeah. So I would say, over the last couple of years, there are themes in the types of breakthroughs that faculty have. So I've worked with a lot of faculty and I noticed this kind of pattern. The first is a breakthrough that happens when a faculty member is redesigning an assessment to be more AI avoidant. So in the process of trying to prevent over-reliance on AI, they end up making their assessment more grounded in the context of the classroom, more experiential or more creative. And so they often realize through this process that redesigning their classroom assessment to avoid AI has actually made their assessment more engaging and more meaningful. So they come to kind of appreciate that AI has challenged them to like up their game and to prompt them to revisit learning outcomes that frankly may have not been revisited for a while and reimagine assessments that probably needed a refresh. I think some of the utility of the institutes and workshops that I facilitate are that faculty are just given time and space to like think about how are my learning outcomes aligned with my
Mm.
assessment, because very often we don't have a lot of time or energy to kind of really revisit these things in a meaningful way as often as we probably should.
Right.
Um,
And a faculty's role is it can be very administrative heavy, even if you care deeply about teaching, you're
Agreed.
just pulled in a lot of different directions. And so being able to have time to think about, okay, the context has changed. How do we revisit these learning outcomes?
Totally. And I will say the second type of breakthrough that I notice happens when a faculty member is redesigning their assessment to be more AI integrative, be more intentional about having students use it with a purpose. Very often in these cases, they discover ways AI can genuinely support or enhance student learning, by providing faster, more personalized feedback or scaffolding complex tasks. And they get really excited to realize that AI doesn't necessarily like signal the downfall of education, but it can be used really intentionally to enrich the learning process and improve the classroom experience, not only for the student, but for them as well. So I think that tends to be really surprising, especially if you come into one of these workshops as a real skeptic.
I'm curious, do you have a specific example, either from your cat class or from another one, of an assessment that an AI integrated assessment and what those two look like, or I don't know, what it was like before and then how it changed?
Yeah, usually I'm working with faculty at the beginning stages of these. So we just started actually doing a follow-up faculty learning community where we give faculty a chance to talk about what's happened with their assessment after they've redesigned it. The most specific examples I can think of are my own assessments. I'll give you an example of something that I've been using. I've been giving students recently that I think has been helpful. I teach a course in identity and sexuality. This course in particular happens to cover topics that are very sensitive and tend to be polarizing. Students often struggle articulating their perspectives and attitudes around course topics.
Hmm.
So I had designed an assignment a few years ago for students to engage in a dialogue with somebody who had opposing views on a course topic. And I noticed over the years that students kind of struggled sometimes to regulate their emotions or to respond in ways that were reflective and not defensive. And so I decided to intentionally integrate AI into this assessment this year. And so now, in preparation for this dialogue, they dialogue with an AI tool about their topic. I give them a pretty nuanced, comprehensive prompt to paste into an AI tool. They have to practice asking questions about this topic and then integrate feedback from AI about how clear and how reflective their responses were, and then continue on with the dialogue for a specified period of time. They share the chat log with me and I review that. And students have overwhelmingly shared that having this time to practice these hard conversations with AI has helped them to approach the topic in a less emotionally charged way,
Hmm.
and to be more thoughtful and more prepared for having the actual conversation with another person. So this is one way where I have noticed AI can really enhance students' skills in terms of communicating and thinking thoughtfully about issues that tend to be really polarizing and emotionally laden.
Yeah, I feel like practice is such an opportunity with AI because practicing with a person is a very vulnerable experience that can be
Yeah,
difficult to make yourself do. And practicing by yourself, looking in the mirror, you don't have that something external giving you feedback. And so AI as a tool for practice is really helpful and can transform your ability to show up as a person if you're able to practice beforehand in a more authentic way.
totally. Yeah. And then in terms of an avoidant redesign, I would say in general, I have created, instead of like traditional papers or research papers that I used to have, I teach an adult development course, and I redesigned a traditional developmental research project into a multimedia project. So students have to identify a developmental theme across the lifespan. And historically, they would conduct a literature review and write a reflective paper, but I asked them to integrate a and create a piece of multimedia that reflects this developmental theme across the lifespan and connect it to research. So some students choose to create coloring books or comic strips or edited video series or like a social media bank of reels. And basically, they're engaging with the material in a way that, yes, they can use AI to help outline and brainstorm, but the process of creating and making the creative decisions that are required of them through the development of the project really helps them to think more deeply about the research and about the theme and to engage with it in a way that feels more meaningful and also just express their creativity. So I've noticed they really respond to that particular assessment because of that experiential creative element.
No one is going to take, or very few people are going to take a reflective paper and then put that into the world and have people engage with it. But if you're making a series of reels or you're making a coloring book or a comic strip, people might actually engage with that outside, and it adds this layer of practicality to what you're creating in an academic space, which hasn't always been there.
Totally. And we do a little show and tell on the last day of class where students do like a little gallery walk and share their piece with their peers, which feels like a much more engaging way to talk about the literature than just saying, like, here's my paper. Do you want to read it? So it's another way for them to engage with each other and to be excited about talking about something they're learning.
That's so cool. As you were talking about creating these assessments, I started thinking about a couple of friends I have who teach online classes at a university level. And one friend in particular has just been so frustrated, I guess, because it's very hard. It feels hard to redesign. She's like, my students that I have in person, I know when they're
Right.
using AI and I have like some sense, but when I'm online, I feel lost and I don't know what to do. And so
Yeah.
as you've been supporting faculty and or maybe you also teach online classes, do you have
I do.
advice for people who are teaching in an online space who are just kind of like, I have no idea how to navigate AI in that environment in particular?
The question is so important, and it's also very discipline specific and scale specific, right? So the number of students that you're teaching and the discipline that you're teaching in. I teach in the summer. The summer classes I teach are online and asynchronous. The courses that I teach, right, my challenges are a little bit different than, someone who's teaching math or engineering. I use a tool called VoiceThread. So essentially, I record my lectures and students have to respond to questions I pose in my lectures with their own videos, and then respond to their peers with videos with their own videos. So there's still a level of engagement. And I've created a rubric that encourages them. They can use notes in their responses, but very often the questions I'm asking them are grounded in the context of the lecture, things that aren't necessarily in their text. They have to respond specifically to things that their peers said. So it'd be really difficult to outsource those types of conversations to AI. And I just actually got my course evals back from my summer two class, and a lot of students share every summer that, I first learned that I had to record all these videos this summer. I was a little demoralized or bummed, like it felt like a lot of work. And then by the end of the semester, I realized that it was such a valuable tool, and I really felt like I was able to develop a sense of community in this online space. So I think using video platforms and specifying like how students should share. So one of the things I've added to my rubric in the last year was Your responses should be spontaneous, which means no, reading directly from a script, because I did get a few students in the last couple of summers who I could tell they had like, ChatGPT up on their screen and they were just reading line by line, some response to a question. So I've changed kind of the requirements for the responses so they're more spontaneous and less kind of script driven. I will say I ask more applied questions in my online exams, and I give them just enough time to really respond to those. I run my exams through AI too, right? And I tell students, like, look, I've run my exam through AI and ChatGPT scores about a B minus. I think what's really important is that you try to help students identify their intrinsic motivation to learn the material. Luckily, this course I teach in the summer is an elective course. Students are taking it because they want to, ostensibly, they want to learn. So I remind them that, if your goal is to learn or try to help them connect with their intrinsic motivation to learn, then it's important that they engage with the content. But you can only do so much. Students have been there are many facets to the structure of a course that are more likely to lead to students cheating or to over relying on AI. So, designing the course to give them flexibility, to give them choice in the types of assessments that they engage with, all of these things not only reduce cheating, and we know that, but they'll also reduce over reliance on AI. So I think there are many things that you can do to ensure that they're not over relying on AI, even in an online async course.
Thank you for sharing those examples because I do think that online environment is just it's similar challenges but different challenges. And so
Yeah,
being able to hear some examples I think will be helpful to folks trying to navigate that.
yeah.
We've talked a lot about people who are educating directly, but we also have leaders who are leading educational institutions who are having a big impact on how faculty teach or teachers teach and how students learn. And I'm curious about either missteps or moments of success that you've seen with people who are leading through this change.
I've been in conversation with a lot of department heads or program coordinators who invite me to these custom workshops that I facilitate. There's been an impulse, not always, but sometimes to streamline policies around AI use, like what's allowed, what's acceptable use, right? How you manage unacceptable use, all of those things. So I think that's a misstep, is to think about a one size fits all approach to AI within a
Mhm.
specific department or school. Every faculty member has different capacities, teaching styles, course contexts, like a lot of strategies that are valuable for a small course are not scalable for a really large class either. So I think that's one misstep I've noticed. I would say the other thing I've noticed is that there's this tendency to swing towards being like AI forward or AI punitive or avoidant, and it's without leaving room for like a thoughtful middle ground. So I think it's really essential to implementation to approach it with nuance and reflection and to resist this black or white thinking about AI being or representing, the downfall of education or the erosion of student learning or thinking, or, that it's something that's going to propel education in like a new way that is intentional. I've worked with some people who encourage the use of AI regardless of like a really specific pedagogical rationale, just because it's a fun, new, shiny kind of object. So, like any tool, AI has benefits and drawbacks. So I think it's our responsibility to kind of maintain that middle space and to think thoughtfully through the benefits and the drawbacks rather than like approaching it in a reactive kind of way.
Yeah, and that's such, I think, courageous leadership too, when you're able to hold that gray space for discussion, because in some ways or probably in most ways, it's easier to just create a policy and then say, okay, I've done this thing, we're good to go. I told people what to do and not to do. But AI, I think, is particularly complex because it's changing very quickly.
Yeah.
It's totally new and people are responding in different ways and it affects you differently depending on what you teach and who you teach. And so the one size fits all policy isn't necessarily going to be effective. Have your views or how have your views shifted over the past few years, either about AI or about how institutions should prepare for it?
I would say overall, my personal views haven't changed much. I don't really approach this work with a specific agenda or belief system around AI. My goal in my role is to just empower faculty to make informed values driven decisions about whether or not to integrate AI. I will say what has evolved a little bit has been my awareness of the broader ethical landscape, particularly related to the environmental impact and labor
Mhm.
issues associated with data training and model development. So I've become more cautious about using AI in ways that don't meaningfully enhance learning. I'm less inclined to use it just for fun or to kind of like play around with different tools, and I'm more intentional about ensuring that it truly adds educational or human value when I'm using it.
A moment ago you talked about how some people are almost overzealous, messianic. They're like, we should just use this for everything. But actually there's an environmental cost for having that sort of perspective and inclination. And so intentionality is not only important for pedagogical reasons, but it's important for these ethical environmental reasons as well.
For sure.
As you're, at UNC, you're kind of a part of this investment in a long-term and ethical approach. And so I'm curious, as in your role right now, what mindsets or capabilities do you think schools or universities need to sustain that kind of thinking long term, especially as the technology capabilities impacts are going to shift with time?
I was on our provost committee for AI a few years ago when we established kind of an AI philosophy to approach guidance and policies around the university. And so I really continue to come back to the principles that we developed related to our overall approach.
Mhm.
The first one is what I shared before, which is the goal is to empower and to not mandate. So to focus on sharing the information that teachers and faculty need to make informed decisions without pressuring them to adopt any specific technologies, to value ethical use, ensuring that AI is applied responsibly and considering the impact on students and society at large, including the environment, to focus on bias awareness or just awareness of how these tools might replicate or amplify harm in some particular way. So educating faculty about the biases inherent in the data or the safety alignment approaches, or even the reinforcement learning through human feedback and just fostering a critical thinking and awareness of potential ethical issues. The other principle is just fostering an open dialogue, just encouraging open and ongoing dialogue about AI and creating space for all voices, even, and most importantly, I think, those who are more skeptical or critical of AI, and making sure that everybody feels like they can express their positions, their beliefs, their attitudes. And then lastly, I would say focusing on student learning and continuous learning. So just prioritizing the enhancement of student learning experiences, using AI as a tool to support rather than replace traditional teaching methods. And then, like you mentioned earlier, just recognizing how fast everything is evolving and committing to continuous learning. And I think just also having compassion and giving ourselves grace as we are attempting to learn all of these new tools and these new frameworks for thinking about learning on top of everything else that we do in our roles as educators. I think that's really important too. I think that desire to be competent and knowledgeable in AI, this fear of not getting it right, kind of prevents some faculty from even engaging at all, right? It's almost like that fear of, or that kind of element of perfectionism in us. Like if we're not going to do it perfectly, we're not going to do it at all. Or if I can't know everything, then I'm not even going to get started on trying to understand what I don't know, or feeling overwhelmed by just the amount of information that comes out about AI. So I think that's an important place to start.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And something I actually thought a little bit about perfectionism earlier in our interview when you said that you were encouraging students not to script their answers and to just speak. It makes me think that in some ways, AI can push people to feel like they can make everything completely perfect. But
Yeah.
because we can use a robot to make everything completely perfect, I think somehow it's giving us this freedom to be less perfect and to say, oh, you can turn in something that you don't have to say this perfectly. We just want you to say something. You don't have
Uh,
to write this perfectly. We just want you to get started. And I feel like that's a really interesting evolution that I've noticed in academic spaces in particular, but in some professional spaces too, of just being told you don't have to, this doesn't have to be as perfect. And used to that was maybe more of a measure of success. And now maybe perfection is a measure of how much many times you ran it through a chatbot.
Totally. And actually, that's another guiding principle when we talk about like AI avoidant principles is to really reimagine your course design and your assessment so that you're focusing on the process of learning and not the final output or the final product, right? So some things you can do to communicate to students that you value their learning and their process are, give them credit for turning in drafts. Allow them to resubmit assignments, ask them to keep process logs of the decisions they make at various points throughout their kind of assessment journey, right? As they're working on these
Mhm.
assessments. So that communicates to students that like I value your learning and I'm going to kind of give you space to work on feedback or integrate feedback and give you an opportunity to kind of earn credit for putting in the effort. So I think that's really important too. But you're right. I noticed like students use AI to email me now. And I tell my students on the first day of class, I'm like, your emails to me don't need to sound sophisticated or polished. I want to hear from you. I don't need you to use AI to compose an email to me. A student's original thoughts or words aren't valued in the way that something AI polished is. I think there's a really important parallel process there to accept that a lot of really valuable learning happens in mistakes and struggle, and that's really important too.
And as people, as students build skills and expertise and go into the workforce, it makes me think of I was working with an organization and they were talking about how a challenge that they were seeing is they had employees who were experts in a particular domain, but they were kind of over relying on AI because AI was making these very beautiful looking drafts very quickly and sort of putting their own competence and expertise on a shelf because the AI output looked so good. So
Mhm.
this feeling of, oh, but maybe AI does know more than me. And I think
Yeah.
that's something we really need to push against if we're going to develop people who are able to go into the world and make good decisions about when and how to use this technology. Just because it can make a really beautiful looking document with nice headers and easy to read sentences doesn't mean that it has the level of nuanced understanding that you bring through the years of expertise that you've built.
Yeah. And I think that that's one unintended benefit of allowing students to use AI in any way they want, because they recognize that even if they ask AI to generate a draft of a paper, there's actually still a lot involved, a lot of that's required of them to edit the text and to check it for accuracy and to add a deeper level of nuance or analysis. I think maybe in high school or in undergrad, first, second year classes AI can complete some of the course work at a level that might earn them a B or something, or a C or an A. But in the upper levels, it's really not going to do that. So I think they do learn that along the way at some point.
As you're working with students who are going to graduate and move into a world that has AI, what do you think is important for students to be able to understand and to be able to do when it comes to moving from, an academic setting to a professional setting in a world where AI is going to be at their fingertips and they may be expected to use it in their place of work?
I think they should be able to assess the context of AI. So recognize when AI use aligns with the purpose of whatever task they're trying to complete, to accurately identify the limitations of AI. And a lot of the direct instruction that I give students is around identifying how these tools are limited based on the data they're trained on, their safety and alignment approach, or just erroneous content that they generate. So really understanding how the tools are limited
Mm.
to evaluate the output itself, right? How to check for accuracy, when to know, like how to engage in that process, when to trust it, and just to justify their choices. So whether if they're not being asked to use AI and they are, they should be able to articulate the rationale for using AI, including like how it affects fairness and how it might both enhance and hinder their ability to develop professionally and intellectually in whatever field that they're in. I think they do recognize that. I've had students in my office this semester who are telling me that they are taking a voluntary ChatGPT detox. When I asked a student about this a few months ago, I was like, why, can you tell me more? And she said, I feel like I'm quote unquote glitching out all the time now. I feel
Mm.
like I'm over relying on AI to help me articulate my thoughts, even in texting with people that I'm socially connected to. I don't really feel like I'm able to confidently articulate myself when I'm speaking to someone now. And so I'm really taking a break because I'm noticing it's kind of eroding these skills that are really important for me in my career. And so just getting students to think about like, in what ways might it hinder or stifle the skills that you really want to develop in your career, and what ways might it enhance it, and to really be clear about what those things are and to adapt their approach to AI with those things in mind.
I love that example. I think that self-awareness and being able to say, I need to take a step back, I need to think differently, because it is so easy, especially when you first start experimenting with the technology, to be like, oh, I should just run everything through this
Right.
because
Right.
it sounds better than me.
Right.
But you lose something when you do that,
Yes.
and it actually doesn't sound better than you. And there's this blandness, I think, that comes when you use a lot of chat GPT responses. And so how cool that your student was able to say, I need a break from this, and to recognize what an important professional skill it is to be able to confidently in the moment answer a question and to be present and not have to check your answer against ChatGPT. That's an important
Exactly.
skill for interviewing for jobs, for being able to lead, to be able to do basically anything. You can't
Exactly.
just interact with humans and be running everything you say in real time through a robot.
Exactly. And I think that's why it's so important in the beginning of the semester, or when you're talking to students and teachers, to really have them identify how learning whatever you're attempting to teach them will actually show up in their personal lives, in their professional lives, in meaningful ways. And so, what is the value of being able to understand and articulate your ideas and your beliefs about whatever it is that we're learning, to really deepen that intrinsic motivation to learn? This is important for me to learn because in my life, personally, professionally, socially, whatnot, I want to be able to, speak confidently about this thing or to demonstrate this skill. And I need to learn and not outsource my learning in order to do that. So getting them to really think about the why. Why is this important? Why is it useful? And I think that actually challenges educators to revisit a lot of those whys that maybe we have lost sight of over the years. You kind of get stuck in maybe going through the motions sometimes if you teach a class over and over again. And so I think that's been really useful for educators to sit back and think about, like, well, why is this really important that my student knows this? Especially if you're teaching a gen ed class or something that students may be taking your class but don't see it that it's relevant to
Mm.
their professional lives or even their personal lives. You have to really uncover that. Why is this important for my students to learn? And how will it impact them in their lives practically and concretely in a way that I can get them to understand and help them to find that intrinsic motivation to learn?
And as a student, I think you can feel that in a classroom when a teacher has really internalized that why, and it creates this almost, I don't know, this like magic feeling in a room. It's kind of electrifying when the teacher really believes in
Yeah.
the content and is able to communicate that through the way they engage with you. And then you feel that too. Otherwise, it's just like we're all being compliant. Like, I have to teach this class, it's my job,
Right.
and you have to learn this, it's your job. The why changes things. I have one question that I always end with.
Yep.
And so I want to give you a chance to share a question, a concern, a hope that you have about AI that's sitting with you right now, the thing that you're just kind of mulling over lately.
There are so many. I would say, beyond the larger ethical concerns, which I think about often, ethical questions about the environmental impact of AI and the exploitation of human data and potential threats to human autonomy and all those things. I would say I'm really focusing on this question of what really gives a human educator unique value. So, as more research emerges on the impact of AI on learning, I hope that we'll be able to distill the qualities of human to human interaction that are truly essential for education. Things, like empathy, presence, all of those things. So, these are the questions that I notice are most pressing in a lot of the faculty members that I speak with, which is, well, if I can, if my role no longer includes like imparting knowledge to some degree, right? Or even like providing critical feedback, what is my role and what is my value? And perhaps AI can offer an opportunity for us to distill those things and to refocus our time and attention in the classroom on those things that are truly grounded in the human to human experience and connection, and kind of let AI take over where it's useful and kind of refocus us. So those are my questions. What are the specific elements? Like, to what degree? And I think we really haven't been able to distill that yet because we haven't tested, that variable in the way that we can now with personalized tutors and all that type of thing. So that's something I'm looking forward to seeing the research on and to really learning more about, and what skills AI is not really adept at helping students foster. We already know from some preliminary research what skills AI can really enhance, but there's still some questions. I'm actually in the middle of doing a scoping review on the role of AI in psychotherapy education. So I
Mhm.
sometimes teach one of like our family therapy course, and I used to teach in family therapy programs. And so there are questions about whether or not AI can help future psychotherapists develop skills like empathy, develop more human-centered skills. We know that it's adept at things like assessment or intervention, but can it actually help students develop those human-centered skills?
Yeah, that's so fascinating. And I can't wait to read. Now I want to read the research too,
Yeah.
because how interesting is it to think about? We probably all have theories, but it'll be
Yeah.
great to see now that we have this comparison point, what is very unique to the human educator versus to the machine. And, there's things that I feel like humans are always going to do better, and some things we might find that machines do better, like
Yep.
washing dishes. I feel like my
Yeah.
dishwasher wins out
Folding
on me every
laundry.
time.
Give me a robot that can fold my laundry and I will be very happy.
That brings us to the end of a truly insightful conversation with Dr. Dana Rieger. Dr. Rieger shared how AI can be a powerful tool for enhancing learning, like using AI practice dialogues on polarizing topics, and how it can challenge educators to create more experiential and creative multimedia projects. Ultimately, her work champions a values driven, nuanced approach to AI, emphasizing that human educators' unique value lies in fostering empathy, presence, and critical dialogue, not just imparting knowledge. To explore resources, connect with our community, and engage with services that support thoughtful conversations like this one, please visit kinwise.org. If you like the show, the best way to support is to subscribe, share with a friend, or leave a quick review. Thank you again for listening to Kinwise Conversations. Until next time, stay curious, stay grounded, and stay Kinwise.